Backwards compatibility on consoles has been a hot topic for many years. If a system at launch didn't support the games that came on the console before it, it's typically met with criticism. For some people, especially those who traded in their system in order to fund the next big one, backwards compatibility was essential if they wanted to carry on playing the games in their library. But newer consoles, with a few exceptions, tend to draw more power. So does that mean that playing backwards compatible games on them are going to cost us more in the long run? Hello and welcome back to the Cost of Living series, where I've been measuring the power draw of all of my consoles to see where we can cut costs and try and save a few quid. Today I'm going to be checking the power draw of various PlayStation consoles when they're running games via backwards compatibility. Are they still drawing all of their power, or do they work out a little cheaper than before? Hello fellow gamers, and how much is backwards compatibility really costing us? If you've been following the Cost of Living series, you'll know that I've already checked the power draw of all the consoles I currently have set up, and they've definitely surprised us on occasion. But that's when they were playing their native games. What's the situation when they're playing games from past generations? Do they cost more, or do they simply not push the consoles that hard so it actually works out cheaper? Most of us simply don't know, and that's why I'm doing this. To find out, I singled out all the PlayStation consoles in my collection and tried playing a game via backwards compatibility on each and every one of them, all the while measuring their power draw with my power meter. Let's start with quite possibly one of the most well-known examples of backwards compatibility. When someone mentions backwards compatibility, many will think of the first PlayStation. PS1 games can be played not only on the PlayStation and PS1 originals, but also on every PS2 and even every PS3. It's quite shocking actually that PS1 games can be played on systems that were actively supported across the span of nearly 3 decades. Now, to check the power draw of other systems when playing PS1 games, I went back to my trusty copy of Wipeout. For a bit of context, Wipeout used up 0.007 kWh on an original PS1, which works out as about a fifth of a pence per hour and over 5 pence for a solid day's worth of futuristic racing. There was already a noticeable drop in power usage when playing the same game on a PS1, drawing only 0.004 kWh. But what about when we drop our game disc into a fat PS2? Bear in mind, when the PS2 played GT4, it ramped up to 0.028 kWh, which was significantly more than what the PS1 drew. Well, sadly, after an hour playing, the PS2 used up 0.026 kWh playing a last-gen game. That's about 3/4 of a pence per hour and closing in on 19 pence for an entire day. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but that's actually over 3.5 times the power draw of an OG PS1 when playing the same game. In fact, the draw is so close to what it draws for a regular PS2 game, you may as well just play PS2 games on it if you can. I suppose though, on a PS2 you have the benefit of games loading a little bit faster, but is that worth paying 3.5 times more to play them? But what about the PS2 Slim? Despite Sony making it minute in comparison to its older brother, all PS2 Slim models still supported PS1 discs. So how do they fare on this tiny system? Playing Wipeout once again, the PS2 Slim sucked up 0.023 kWh of power, which isn't much less than a fat PS2. Costing about 2/3 of a pence per hour and a little over 16.5 pence over the course of a whole day, it's still costing quite a bit more than the PS1s did. I guess if you don't have a PS1, one of these might be your only choice. That is, unless you picked up a PS3 of course. All models of the PS3 are also backwards compatible with PS1 discs. You might not be able to connect your existing memory cards to it without a special adapter, but the thought of having your PS1 games appearing lovely and sharp on your HD TV, can you even put a price on that? Well, turns out you can, because this launch fat PS3 for example, ordinarily draws so much power that it dwarfs every single model of PlayStation that came before it, combined. But that's when it's playing ultra mega powered PS3 games. What's the verdict when it's playing piddly little PS1 discs? I hope you're sitting down. 0.184 kWh, 5.5 pence per hour and over £1.30 for a full day. Keep that up for a solid month and you won't be able to afford another game. It's absolutely bonkers. Still, credit where credit's due, it is less power than it normally uses when playing PS3 games, but it's still 26 times the cost of playing a PS1 game on an OG PlayStation. Imagine every time you started playing a PS1 game, you had to fire up 25 other PlayStations in order to do it. That's the equivalent of playing them on a PS3. Remember when the US Air Force put together a supercomputer comprised of over 1,700 PS3s? Oof, I'd hate to see their electricity bill at the end of the month. There are other models of PS3 that we can consider, such as this slim model that I have set up. It still draws a decent amount of power though. I mean, even this one drew 0.08 kilowatt hours when playing through GT6. So let's see what happens when it's playing a game from 2 generations previous. After an hour of trying out Wipeout again for an even comparison, my PS3 Slim here drew 0.069 kilowatt hours. That works out as over 2 pence per hour and nearly 50 pence for an entire day. That's certainly a lot better than what we got with the fat PS3, but it still costs nearly 10 times as much to play a PS1 game on it when compared to an original PlayStation. Now, sure, you're able to play PS1 games on your HD TV with all those sharp pixels without giving it a second thought. But you can also achieve very close to the same thing on a PS1 using an RGB SCART cable and a line doubler such as the OSS-C. Still, the PS3 Slim wins out for convenience sake, but is it worth it when the running costs are 10 times more? It's up to you to decide, I guess. While the PS1 was supported on plenty of systems, PlayStation 2 backwards compatibility was only ever realised on launch PlayStation 3s. This functionality was dropped on later models roughly a year after the PS3's initial release. There was also a difference in how they played PS2 games. While PS3s and NTSC regions started off with hardware emulation options, by the time it reached the UK's shores, the only way for us Brits to play our PS2 games on our PS3s was through software emulation. The reason I'm telling you this now is because my measurement of my launch PS3 will be based on the PS2 game being emulated via software. Chances are the power draw will be different when hardware emulation is involved. But first, let's remind ourselves what the PS2 would cost when playing its own games. Gran Turismo 4 on my fat PS2 drew in 0.028 kilowatt hours, costing a little under a penny per hour and over 20 pence when taking on the 24-hour of Le Mans. Now some of you might be asking, what about the PS2 Slim? And you would be right to ask, because I do have a 70,000 model here. It works fine with PS1 discs, but sadly, not so well for PS2 games anymore. It'll run them for about 10 minutes before freezing and the graphics just go haywire. All the while the music is still playing in the background. I don't know what the problem is yet, and I don't want to try doing any PS2 game benchmarks on this until I resolve it. If this problem sounds familiar to you, please feel free to leave a comment down below with any possible fixes, because I really would like to get this sorted out. Instead then, let's get cracking with that fat PS3, and the question that's on my lips right now is, am I going to need to remortgage my house in order to run PS2 games on it? Let's slip our copy of GT4 into the drive, and hello, is that nationwide? Turns out PS2 software emulation on my launch PS3 costs 7 times as much. Playing GT4 on this, it wasn't sucking up power, it was metaphorically guzzling it, taking in 0.199 kilowatt hours. That is a penny every 10 minutes, and over £1.40 to take on a full 24-hour endurance race. To put that into context, it's cheaper to play Doom Eternal on a Series X with ray tracing enabled. It's mind-boggling. So yeah, while it's convenient to be able to play your PS2 games on a launch PS3, and you do get an effortlessly clear image out of it, no. Now, sadly, disc support for past systems wasn't offered when the PlayStation 4 came out. Today, outside of a select few titles available on PlayStation Plus Premium, there's no way to play PS1, 2, nor 3 games on a PS4. Now, I don't have Premium, so we'll have to leave our testing for those here, though I might revisit them if I ever try it out. In the meantime, we have one last backwards compatible system to check. The PlayStation 5 offered more or less full support of PS4 games when it launched back in late 2020. Both the disc and discless models can run digital PS4 games, and the disc model accepts PS4 discs without skipping a beat. But with the PS5 being one of the most expensive consoles to play games on at over 6 pence per hour, what's it going to be like when playing PS4 games? Are we going to see a repeat of what we saw with the PS3? In order to know whether it costs more to play PS4 games on a PS5, I first needed a benchmark on a base PS4. Up to this point, I only had one for the PS4 Pro, where it drew 0.136 kilowatt hours, costing over 4 pence per hour and close to £1 for a full day. Well, I suppose now's as good a time as any to measure my base PS4 with the same game, Gran Turismo 7. After spending an hour on it, the base PS4 racked up 0.132 kilowatt hours, which isn't much less than what the PS4 Pro drew. That is just shy of 4 pence per hour and still touching £1 when tackling one of the game's 24-hour endurance races. So now I knew what the PS4 and PS4 Pro cost when playing GT7, I prepared myself for what was to come. I installed the PS4 version on my PS5 and, after 60 minutes of racing around various tracks, I got my final measurement. 0.1 kilowatt hours. Yes, that is less than a PS4. And yes, I'm just as surprised as you are. For those interested, that's roughly 3 pence per hour and would work out about 72 pence for the whole day. So, by the looks of things, it is cheaper playing PS4 games on a PS5, costing roughly 3/4 as much as a base PS4. Now, it would be interesting to see how it fares on a PS4 Slim as well, if I had one. This is a surprising result though. Given how much power a PS5 normally draws when playing a game, I would have assumed it would simply be more expensive to play even last generation's releases as well. Then again, that's assuming that it's still using all of its internal, gubbins and stuff to run it. Looking at these numbers, it clearly isn't. The PS4 and PS4 Pro were clearly being pushed to their limits running GT7, whereas for the PS5, it was a walk in the park. So overall, looking at everything we've discovered today, it does seem to generally cost more for you to play your backwards compatible games on newer PlayStations. With the exception of PS4 games on the PS5, you would be better off in the long run getting a hold of the original models where possible, depending on how often you play these systems that is. I would like to expand on this, checking backwards compatibility on other consoles to see how they fare, so in the future you can expect me to cover the likes of Microsoft Xbox and various Nintendo systems as well. I wonder how they'll stack up. But until then, I'm gonna head off, so thanks very much for watching. Have you been playing all your games on backwards compatible systems? Or have you done the same as me and basically just kept all the old ones? Let everyone know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, a like for the video is always appreciated, and there's always a subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.